Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Weekend Waypoints. Joe Healy here of D1 Baseball and SEC Extra to preview Friday's action around the SEC. I guess first things first, apologies that this episode is not live. So no live comments on this one, no live chat. I wish that could be the case, but it cannot. This is the first time this season, unfortunately, where logistics have just gotten in the way. I'm traveling Friday morning. So the recording it at a normal time was not going to be possible. So I'm recording it ahead of time. This is Thursday afternoon. So my apologies on that. I miss having the live comments, but those will be available Saturday and Sunday. Saturday and Sunday's episodes will not be affected. Those will go on as normal and as scheduled, as usual. So let's get to this Friday's preview here of what's going on in the SEC. As always, we'll start with a news roundup, just some news and notes, some injury stuff, some midweek results stuff, things of that nature. First off, for Vanderbilt, a little bit of positive news, a little bit of negative news on the injury front. The positive is that Ethan McIlvaine is hopeful to return this weekend. He's been out for several weeks and is a big part of that bullpen whenever he's healthy. He was just really get going when he went down with an injury. So getting him back will be huge for Vanderbilt if that is indeed the case this weekend. On the negative side, Jaden Davis, who you may remember got hit in the face with a pitch last weekend against Mississippi State. He had orbital bone fracture surgery Thursday. No timetable yet for his return because it's just too early after the procedure to really have a good feel for that. But obviously not available this weekend, goes without saying. Another positive bit of news this time for Auburn. Ike Irish is back this weekend. He's been dealing with an ankle injury suffered 2 weekends ago against Mississippi State with that awkward slide into first base. But he is back. We'll have to see if he is limited at all. But certainly having his bat back in the lineup in any capacity is a big deal for an Auburn team that's fighting for its SEC tournament lives this weekend. So that's a big series for them. On a couple of, let me get to some other injury stuff here just to keep it a little bit more organized. For Arkansas, Hunter Dietz done for the year. That's unfortunate. He started the year on the shelf, came back. Actually, his first appearance was while I was there during the LSU series while I was in Fayetteville, but only appeared a couple of times before he was shut down again. Now they're shutting him down for the year. Colin Fisher also unavailable for the time being for Arkansas. So a couple of arms down, but honestly, the most important arms for Arkansas are still up and healthy, and they've had, knock on wood for Arkansas, good health on the pitching staff so far this season. Mason Molina, by the way, back this weekend in the rotation. Missed last weekend with an ankle injury of his own, but he is back starting. We'll see exactly how good he is this weekend because anytime you miss a weekend, it means you weren't feeling great. So we'll see if he's hampered at all by that or if he's just totally back to normal. For LSU, no word yet on Nate Ackenhausen in his return. You may remember last weekend leaving early from an outing, leaving after his warm-up pitches, I believe. No word there yet. Ethan Fry, who's had a shoulder injury, that's still an issue. Obviously, he's not been a regular this year, has not been a big part of it, but is another depth piece that LSU is without. Will Tippett to be determined, TBD on his availability this weekend. South Carolina has had to shift its defense around a little bit in his absence. They've started Lee Ellis at shortstop. They did that last Friday against Kentucky, or in the first game of the series against Kentucky. The other two games, they slid Talmadge Lecroy over to shortstop. That moved Gavin Casas to third base, moved Ethan Petrie to first base. That's obviously a lesser defensive alignment for South Carolina. So getting Will Tippett back is not just for the benefit of the shortstop position, although that's also true. It's also really for the defensive capability of the entire infield. So TBD still, though, on his availability. Ethan Leger, who's been Ole Miss's best hitter this season, had x-rays done on his thumb after Wednesday's Ole Miss game against Mississippi State, which Ole Miss lost. That would be a big loss for him if he misses any sort of time there. But just at this point, just x-rays done after Wednesday's game. What I skipped over earlier, because I wanted to get to the rest of this injury stuff, is the both of which involve Texas A&M. A couple of various cheating scandals, if you want to call them that. I don't think either of them are going to rise to the level of the Astros trash can banging or anything of that nature. But the first deals with Christian Mrachna, Georgia relief pitcher. I've been asked about it on radio a little bit this week, so it's definitely been talked about a lot. But for those who haven't seen it, I don't know how you wouldn't have by now, but in case you haven't, there's a video of Christian Mrachna in the bullpen where he walks over to a corner, he kind of crouches, he's doing something, you can't see what he's doing, and then that gets stitched together with him kind of fiddling with his glove in a way that doesn't look like the way a pitcher typically messes with his glove between pitches. He also pitched really well in that outing, struck out, I think, 5 in 2 innings, including some of the better hitters in the A&M lineup. So that kind of led people to believe that he was using a substance. I will admit that the videos don't look great for him. They're not a great look. But those who are wishing for any sort of suspension or punishment, that because he was not ejected, because A&M did not ask for a glove check, there's really no mechanism for the SEC to dole out any sort of punishment for him retroactively. Now, I would expect teams to be a little more vigilant generally and with him in the game. For his part, Wes Johnson, Georgia head coach, more or less dismissed it earlier this week, and a little bit of media availability he had. If you haven't seen that, go to Anthony Dasher, who covers Georgia, his Twitter feed. He's got stuff from Wes Johnson on that earlier this week. The other one, and if for more on that, Mark Etheridge and I talked about the Mrachna thing earlier this week on Highway to Hoover, the first episode of the week. We went a little bit longer on it. No difference in my take on it from between then and now, but you can get Mark's 2 cents on it and whatnot if you listen to that episode of Highway to Hoover. The other issue is Jim Schlossnagle went on Texag's radio. Texag's a local media outfit in Bryan College Station. And he said that, there is an SEC team that was caught using a basically live stream technology in their home dugout that was giving them an advantage. He cited some particularly different batting average numbers, home versus away for this team. And obviously was upset about that, but didn't obviously name the team, but mentioned that it happened, mentioned those numbers. We'll have to see what comes of that. That one's not as straightforward as the sticky stuff, because the sticky stuff you can kind of, opposing coaches can ask more often for glove checks. If we really wanted to, the SEC office could mandate umpires doing the MLB thing, or even, the NCAA could do this. Legislation moves slow, so I wouldn't hold my breath for this year, but the SEC could easily just mandate, hey, when you come off the field in an SEC game, including the SEC tournament, we're going to check, just like an MLB, check your hands and your glove. That seems to me, this is just me, that seems fairly easy to implement. So maybe that's the answer there. But as far as the in dugout stuff, I don't know, and I'm kind of naive on this. I kind of just assumed that maybe not in the dugout, but in the tunnel, that, there are people that have access to a live stream or, some sort of pretty much instant feedback. I guess I'm wrong on that, and that's not the expectation. So we'll see. This is kind of a TBD on where this goes, because I don't know exactly what the answer is here in this one. But regardless, that made some news, so worth mentioning here. Okay, let's move on to the actual more specific weekend preview stuff. The series of the weekend for me is Arkansas at Kentucky. The top spot in the overall SEC lead is on the line here. Those two teams both 16-5 on the season, tied atop the overall SEC standings. Arkansas atop the West, Kentucky atop the East. Tennessee and A&M, by the way, 1 game behind those two teams in their respective divisions. So those 4 teams really have kind of separated themselves, and that's really the quartet to watch for the SEC regular season title. Perhaps we'll get some clarity with Arkansas and Kentucky this weekend. The interesting part for me in the matchup is that it is a stylistic clash. Kentucky's pitching staff has struggled the last 2 weekends at South Carolina, dealing with a smaller ballpark with a team that swings hard, swings it from its heels sometimes in South Carolina, and that had a really good approach against Kentucky pitching. And then 2 weekends ago at home against a Tennessee offense that's very well the best in the conference and in the country by extension there. So how about this weekend, where you're playing at home again, which is a bigger ballpark, against an Arkansas team that just isn't swinging it that well this season? .238 batting average in SEC games. They have one guy batting over 300 in conference play. That's Peyton Stovall. Will that end up being what the doctor ordered for Kentucky? Or will it be that Arkansas actually looks at it as, hey, this is a pitching staff that's kind of scuffling right now, trying to find it. This is an opportunity for us to have more success offensively than what we've had up to this point of SEC play. I think both teams are looking at it as an opportunity. Only one of them ultimately can be right. And it's going to be fascinating to see which of those two are correct. On the other side, though, it's fascinating from the standpoint of this Kentucky lineup has helped the team deal with some of the shortcomings on the mound the last couple of weeks by being a lot more offensive than they've been. And so while I'm never going to predict any team to score very much off Hagen Smith, what can Kentucky do against Tigert and Molina in the bullpen? Now, most teams, the answer has been not much. But we'll see with Kentucky a good lineup. Maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe Mason Molina is not quite 100%. Maybe it's a shorter start from him, which exposes the bullpen more. Again, I'm not going to bank on that because of how good Arkansas's pitching staff has been this year and continues to be best in the country by a pretty wide margin, by my own estimation. But an interesting matchup there nonetheless. The pitching matchup of the day for Friday, I'm going to point you to, is Alabama's Greg Ferrone against Mississippi State's Cal Steven. A battle of pleasant surprises for those two teams. I mean, they're starting pitchers that without them, you shudder to think where those two teams would be. Cal Steven, of course, for State has emerged as the most dependable starter in that rotation, which, has also included Nate Dome, who has been injured for quite some time, really hasn't been available for most of SEC play. And Jurangelo St. who's got really good stuff and is dominant sometimes, but is just not quite as, he doesn't get as deep into games as Cal Steven. He's not as efficient as Cal Steven. So having Steven be as steady as he has been a big deal for them. And then Alabama, maybe even more so for Greg Ferrone, because no Riley Quick in the rotation. He got injured early on, had Tommy John surgery. Ben Hess has not been the pitcher that we thought he could be going into this season. Hagen Banks was a guy who was in the rotation after Riley Quick fell out of it with the injury. Hagen Banks himself went down. So they, Alabama has had to cycle through several iterations of the rotation. Greg Ferrone has been a constant since he's entered and has been really good for them. And again, without him, you really kind of shudder to think where they would be. Where they are right now, though, even though they're 9-12, very good RPI. Alabama is in good shape. Now, they can't rest too much on their laurels because they still are 3 games under 500. They can't afford to lose any more ground on moving up to 500 if they want to ensure of being a postseason team, but they're certainly trending the right way now. Ferrone has been a big part of that, will continue to be a big part of it. Looking forward to that pitching matchup on Friday. One other note here too, of course, because I'm recording this Thursday afternoon, to run Friday, the Tennessee-Florida game, the opener of that series has not happened yet, so obviously there will not be any reaction to that from me. Should something notable there happen that still feels relevant when I record the Saturday morning episode, I will pick that up then. We'll talk about that then, but my apologies on that. Finally, what to watch for this weekend. Got a couple of other writers out at SEC sites. I will actually be covering a game out of the SEC this weekend, not necessarily out of the footprint, but out of the conference. I'll be down at USC Upstate, High Point USC Upstate, playing for first place in the Big South. I'm chipping in with some mid-major coverage this weekend, but others, obviously I'll be watching everything happening in the SEC. I'll be watching and rewatching games that I missed. So no worries there. I will still be right on top of it all, but we'll be covering some different games. But to make up for that, Aaron Fitt will be at Vanderbilt in Georgia in the Friday game there. Burt Granger will also be at Arkansas, Kentucky for their Friday game. So Aaron Fitt and Burt Granger out there for probably the 2 best series of this weekend for the Friday games of those series. So make sure, I'm sure you're already following Aaron, but also make sure you're following Burt Granger, who does a really good job for us and covers things a little bit differently. He's able to give some insight kind of on the scouting, player development side that is not necessarily my forte as much. So he's got a different spin on things. So I always appreciate seeing him cover SEC teams because he's looking at it through a slightly different lens. All right, folks, that is going to be it for this edition of Weekend Waypoints. Again, my final round of apologies here for having to pre-record on you guys. I wish we could still have the live chat and whatnot for this first episode, but I promise Saturday and Sunday's episodes will be as normal, so we'll be able to catch up then and do some chatting at that point. But until then, enjoy the Friday of baseball, and I will talk to y'all